Goodness gracious.
Hey everyone on Facebook, welcome to another episode of GoTo Biz Professionals. We are coming to you live from Works Lab in Independence, Missouri. Today we have Brett Nelson, who is a financial and risk advisor for our businesses. He's also one of our InTech pros. So he's been working with our businesses one-on-one, helping them out, figuring out that financial and figuring out the risks and the liabilities and helping them through those early stage steps and evaluating that. So thank you so much for coming by here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for this fancy mug.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, everyone knows when you're getting into business, there is some financial investment. Sure. So for your folks that you're just starting to work with, what are some of those considerations that every business needs to think about on the financial side? And what are some of the things that a lot of times folks are not thinking about or they forget about that you have to help them out with?
Sure. Well, obviously, we get the idea, and then we got to figure out how we get this going, right? And so, obviously, raising capital or getting the money is typically the first step that everyone either is most concerning, certainly, and typically the first step that everyone says, "Okay, I've got to think about this right away." And so, when we're looking at when we're examining that, and we're thinking about starting up a business, and then we're starting to think about in terms of raising capital, that is really maybe the thing that is most impacted by the form of business that we choose, meaning sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, being from bottom to top. The sole proprietorship, the nice thing about it is that you have complete freedom. I mean, it's your deal. There's no one else involved. You're the one and only. But what you give up in exchange for that is that all the financial burden lies on you as well, right? And then you move up to partnership, which would be your opportunity to go find someone else to help you fund this startup. But obviously, when you do that, you're giving up a degree of control in the business. And then if you move up to incorporating, depending on what type of corporation that is, you could, if it's just a standard corporation, which would be called a C corporation, at that point you're talking about the ability for really almost anybody to, necessarily buy. I mean, obviously if you're not public, but there's the opportunity for people to buy shares in your business, buy stock in your business, and buy investment interest in your business. And when that happens, you have shareholders. Shareholders actually have a degree of control in what goes on as well. And so, in C corporations and shareholders probably aren't going to be where most of the people at the Innovation Center that we're talking to in the tech program are going, but it's something to be aware of, especially on the tech side, if things can move very quickly on that side. So absolutely.
Yeah. So that first step that a lot of folks might they're not thinking about yet. Mm-hmm. They're thinking about the money maybe later down the road,
Sure.
But it starts with just making the thing an actual thing,
yeah,
an actual
really
legal
does.
thing.
It really does, and it starts with. Let me take a step back and say one thing that I get a lot of inquiries about is the business plan, right? And obviously, when we need the business plan, it's because we're going to the bank, maybe, or we're going to an investor to try and get them to put capital into our business. And I think this is one interesting tidbit to share that, as we talked about, something that maybe we just don't really consider or think about a lot of the time. I think the trap in general, just period in life, is to get focused on what's the one thing I can do, when really there's multiple things that you can do. For example, I have a woman that I'm working with that just started a home healthcare business, and she was wanting to get a business plan together, and she was telling me she's trying to decide if she wanted to bring on an individual investor or get a loan from the bank. And I said, well, why don't you do both, right? Get a little bit of money from the investor, get a little bit of money from the bank. That way, when you get a personal loan, it's your money. You're just paying the bank interest on it, right? So if nothing else, maybe if you're going to go 50-50 with the investor, now maybe you can bring 70% of it to the table and get 30 from them. Now you have the majority control in the business and all the things that come with it. But yeah, that's another good thing to keep in mind when we talk about how we're going to raise that capital. It's not just a matter of how we've formed our business and what abilities we have with that, but it's also, once we've got the choices, what are our choices, and what choices do we make based on our goals. So I think at the end of the day, it's really all about what your goals are. We talk about that all the time. So.
Absolutely, and that makes a lot of sense to diversify, because a lot of times the bank doesn't want to fund the whole thing.
Yeah,
They're
they
like,
might give you some.
Exactly.
Especially when you're running into trouble with debt to income and things of that nature.
So we're kind of getting into now the kind of the risk side. So can you tell me a little bit about what you work with your businesses, and then some of those things that folks don't think about before they get into this?
Sure. Well, all business owners to a degree really have, I've found, five kind of key points that we want to be addressed to one degree or another. And as we mentioned, the first would be choosing that form of organization. But particularly, it's going to be, how do I get going with the least amount of formalities and the least amount of startup costs possible, right? How do I get going while keeping the most amount of control possible, which is what we just talked about. Then it's taxation of the business, taxation of my income, taxation of my employees' income, and then it's flexibility within the business to change the way that we're organized, to change the way that we're structured, and finally, of course, the liability risks, like you said as well. And so, the good thing is that I think I found that it seems like most business owners that I talk with, particularly sole proprietors or general partnerships, are, and even limited, but particularly sole and general partnerships, they really, the first step is typically trying to figure out where they can get the money to start it. And then very quickly, the second step is often the risk, right? What am I opening myself up to from a risk standpoint, right? And so very, very simply, as I'm sure most of the people that are watching this or listening are going to know, but we might as well summarize. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of in the same way that we talked about sole proprietor, least amount of formalities and startup costs, most amount of control, but most personal risk on the financial side is also going to be most personal risk on the liability side, right? And then it's going to move up the ladder, like we talked about. Partnerships, depending on how you structure, and this is where LLCs came into play, and why it is important to look at LLC or limited or even a limited liability partnership, is that in a general partnership, if you have no liability protection, and I'm not talking about insurance, but I'm talking about the way you're structured. If you're not structured as a limited liability entity, you're not only liable for the actions of yourself, but you're liable for the actions of the other partner as well, if it's just a general partnership. And then we move on to limited liability company and limited liability partnership, which you really don't see a lot of limited liability partnerships anymore, because at that point you might as well just become an LLC, because in a limited liability partnership there has to be a general partner, and he is exposed to unlimited liability. Up the ladder to corporation, where one of the nice things about a corporation is that with a corporation, the corporation is its own entity. So really, the corporation is what's liable, not the shareholders. But to that degree, the corporation can be sued as its own entity. And at that point, if there was a judgment filed, if the corporation goes bankrupt, then the shareholders are probably going to lose at least their it's very much like a limited liability company. They're going to at least lose their investment in the business. They might not lose anything beyond that. But that's kind of the general risk exposure. But what are the risks, right? That's the risk exposure. But what are the risks, right?
Absolutely.
I think that really honestly is the we don't know what we don't know piece, right? Understanding continuation. I mean, most of the people watching this that get going are going to hopefully hear of the term buy-sell agreement at some point, and probably wonder what that is. So that would be a quick little educational piece to talk about. Would be a buy-sell agreement is simply it's something that's put in place because once you own a business, that business is now part of your estate. Even if it's not worth anything, if it's in debt, whatever, and even if you say, Brett, I have an app and I put it on my phone. Well, it's still upon, if for some reason something were to happen and you were to pass on, it would go into your estate. It may not have any value, but it would go into your estate. And now we're talking about transfer of ownership or transfer of the business. If you have employees, or even if you just have a partner or significant other, we've got to make sure that we're just understanding. I guess at the end of the day, we're talking about continuation. We start talking about risk, we're talking about continuation. And that can be, continuation risk doesn't have to be in the event that something awful happens and we get hit by the beer truck and we don't come home at night. Continuation risk could also be, if things go great, if we haven't established our interest in the business right away, during the honeymoon phase, not during the right?
Yes.
When everybody's happy, like day one, we say, okay, this is your interest, this is my interest. If we wait till it's time that we're selling or someone's coming in or you and I are partners and I just don't want to do it anymore and you want to stay in, if we wait till then to figure out concrete, and I'm not just talking about general, but concrete interest in the business, that's a risk, because the risk is going to be that you and I don't agree on how much interest each of us has in the business, right? And
Absolutely.
So establishing basis is a word I talk about a lot, and basis is just a fancy term for your interest in the business. Whether you're a partner or a sole proprietor, you're going to have basis and interest. Basis or interest really is the, I mean, it just affects so many different aspects. It affects how much you can write off in losses and taxes at the end of the year, or how much of a gain you make and how much capital gains tax you pay. And then, of course, it affects at the end of the line when someone comes along and says, I want to buy this from you. It's going to affect how much you're going to take and how much the other person's going to take.
Absolutely.
So that's, I think, and the nice thing about a buy-sell agreement, is that a buy-sell agreement, to a degree, it's going to at least give much more clarity to how much interest each person has in the partnership, because, and an operating agreement could do the same thing. In a partnership, an operating agreement could do the same thing. But I would recommend looking at a buy-sell along with an operating agreement. Okay. I wouldn't recommend just relying on the operating agreement. But both of those things are going to establish with much more clarity how much interest each person has in the business. Right?
Absolutely. And that's something that honestly we've seen throughout
the
incubator.
Over there.
Yes, so many folks that come in that are partners on the business. They come in, everything is happy, everything is good, it's pie in the sky. But that's one of the most common difficulties we see with our businesses is two or more people, and then they're just not being those agreements put in place when they should have been.
I think what's really important here at WorksLab is that you're going to have, in both of these industries, whether it's the catering industry or the tech industry, there's going to be capital that's not money, right? People are going to be contributing things to create the business that you can't necessarily quantify by saying, okay, I gave you $1,000 or I gave you $5,000. Yes. Intellectual property, talent, ability, experience, all these different things that have a value, but not a concrete value from a standpoint of a receipt or this or that. And so that's why I think it's extremely important to get with a financial, not just an attorney, but a financial planner, because just, if nothing else, just having a third party sit down and be the kind of mediator in between the two people and the person in between the two people that takes everything in and just helps. It just helps come to us. It's very hard for you and I to sit here and have a conversation. Even if we are great friends and we're super excited for this to get going, it still might be hard for me to say, well, I've got 51 and you've got 49, right? Even though in my mind I think that I should have 51, you think that you should have 51. So having an outside party do that. And the reason why I recommend getting with a financial planner, one, is because the nice thing about financial planners, very few financial planners charge for their time. So whereas with an attorney, and listen, hey, get an attorney, sit down with an attorney. I'm not saying that. Sit down with an attorney. And typically I'll bring in an attorney when we get to that point on my own if they don't have one. But along with sitting down with an attorney, because they're going to charge you they're going to charge you per hour and lots of time, and not to mention the fact that we do financial planning, they do law.
Exactly.
But again, a financial planner typically you can sit down with for free, ask questions. Get information, and it doesn't cost you anything. So certainly, I would say, in general, I know it goes without saying, but when you're starting a business, leverage all the free services that you can leverage and retain without paying for them. Take advantage.
That's our philosophy.
Take advantage of it, right?
If that is an option and it's getting you what you need for the business, but then also knowing that at a certain point you will need to pay somebody who's got the expertise. So, but managing that, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for. If you want to connect more with Brett, we're going to make sure that we've got a link on the post. So connect with him more.
You can talk to
Brett.
Talk to me for free. Yeah, you can call me and talk to me. I'll be happy to talk.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. Catch us for the next episode. Look forward. I'm actually not sure who our next person is, but look forward. We'll put that on Facebook and let you know. We'll see you next time.